process, participation, and communication, make certain everybody's on board. I can't emphasize this enough as you go through. This is a huge issue because it's going to affect every single employee in the organization. And the ones that are impacted by it, make certain they have a chance, they have their voice heard, that they're listened to, especially those that are line managers as you go through. Look at the difference here. We start looking at the workers. The US wages are so much higher than a lot of the rest of the world as you go out there. So what if you have somebody in New York City and you want to sit down and have them transferred to Vietnam as you go through? Do you sit down and take somebody making over $100,000 and cut them down to $11,000? What about them? Are they ready to handle the cultural differences? There'll be a huge one as you go through. And then what about their families in the process? Are you going to sit down and have the families go through and are going to help them enculturate them as you go through? What about the language issue? Are you going to teach them how to speak that? You're going to hire somebody to translate for them? There's always a problem there because it takes more time as you go through. Look at all the other things. Is there a way for them to come back if they choose to do that? Or maybe is there a way for them to live there because they love the culture and they love the country as you go through? All these things are aspects that really will fit on a global HR department as you go through. There's a lot more considerations other than labor costs. You have to look on the total operating costs when you start looking on a global market. You start tapping into other countries, especially when their labor is so much more inexpensive than here in the United States. You got to look at their proximity, how fast can things get done, what kind of response to customers. If it's made in Vietnam and your primary market is in Europe, you may have a problem. It might be better off to sit down and establish a new front over in Europe someplace than have it over in Vietnam because it just gets there that much faster as you go through. Look on reduced inventory levels. A lot of that is a big issue when it comes down to having a global organization. Let's look on another challenge of executive pay. It really has a big influence on the organization's performance. It sets a tone for the culture of the organization. They're making $1 million plus $100 million a year. Well, pay attention to that because it sounds cool. The bragging rights to be on the cover of Fortune magazine saying, yo, I am the greatest and so on, and I make so much money. Look at me. Pay attention if your mouth is flapping as you go through. What about the employee that's only making $100,000 a year or $50,000 a year while the CEO is flapping their jaw about how much money they're making? That sit down has a huge impact, usually a negative one as you go through. So the ratio of top executive pay to the average worker is 300 times what that person. So in other words, if they're making 100,000, multiply it by 300, oh my gosh, that's an awful lot of money. So there tends to be a trust gap when it's broadcast too much as you go through. This is from 2020, Elon Musk making $6.65 billion. At this time, he's the wealthiest person on planet Earth as you go through. Oak Street Health, I got to tell you, I've seen the name, Mike's name out there once or maybe twice. I never knew he made this much money. That's $500 million a year. And then of all things, RX Holdings, I knew about the company, but that being said, the two co-CEOs, they're making basically $500 million themselves as you go through. And then poor Eric Wu, he's only making $388 million a year. He's only number 5 in the worldwide compensations game as you go through. That really has an impact overall as you go through. So the CEO thing, how that's handled is a big thing. It's a public relations nightmare an awful lot of times, especially if you have a CEO whose ego is so big, they have to always talk on Twitter as you go through. EO, this is enormous as you go through, how people are treated in different countries as you go through. And no matter what happens, we still have a pay differential between men and women in our country, but also worldwide as you go through. Sometimes it's challenges and sometimes it's choices as you go through the process, but overall still that inequity is there and it should be paid attention to, especially by human resources as you go through. Comparable worth. I've had to deal a couple times with the aspect of those custodians make more than me and I help support my boss. They do more for their organization than they do. Okay. And sometimes you have to sit down and say, well, maybe you want to become a custodian. If you want to, we can arrange a transfer over there. But I don't want to get dirty. Okay. That's the price of getting dirty as you go through. So those dialogues, they happen. But what is comparable worth? Should a forklift driver make more than an executive assistant as you go through? Should somebody that does this over here, they fill chemical bottles all day long, sit there, get the nozzle, put it over here. They have to wear an entire moon suit in the process to make sure they don't get damaged as you go through. Should that person get paid more money than somebody that sits in the front office and cranks out paperwork as you go through? So it depends what this is, and you really have to sit down and look at this, make certain there's no systemic compensation discrimination. That's a big thing as you go through. The FLSA establishes a minimum wage as you go through, and really the minimum wage right now in the United States, time of this recording, is a whole $7.25. There's a lot of talk about doubling it to $15 as you go through. But to be honest, right now, the minimum wage is $17.50. When In-N-Out Burger sits down and posts a sign on the door that says $17.50 per hour starting page, that means the economic minimum wage is much higher than what the law sits down and says, because it's $10 higher than what the federal law says in the process. So who establishes the wages as you go through? Should we have a cap on how much CO should make as you go through? And it all depends as you go through. What is exempt status? There are some people that are claimed to be supervisory or specialty things that are exempt from overtime pay. After 40 hours, a lot of jobs are required to sit down and get paid time and a half as you go through, according to a thing called the short scale established by the Wage Hour Division of the Department of Labor. So that being said, as you go through, make certain that you're looking as to which jobs are supervisory and that you can exclude them from compensation for time and a half as you go through, but also make certain, if the laws apply, that you are paying time and a half. For instance, the federal law requires after 80 hours of compensation over 2 weeks, you pay time and a half. In California, it's not just, it's over 40 hours, but it also is more than 8 hours in 1 day, time and a half. Know what the rules are, know what the laws are. The issue comes down to the US needs to compete as you go through. And also the question, does government have a role in regulating pay? Should they regulate the minimum wage in the market, or should they regulate the aspect of the highest wage as you go through? And is comparable worth a factor in determining pay scales overall in human resources? These are all things to consider as you sit down, you take this class, and as you advance in your career, especially if you go into human resources, pay attention to the needs of your organization as well as the needs of your employees when it comes to compensation. Take care.